Hi, I'm Dr. J. Varma, and welcome to Thermometer. On this channel, I check the temperature of health in the United States and around the world, and I give you expert insights on infectious diseases and public health. I'm pleased today to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Jon Epstein, for our weekly episode called Inside Bird Flu, where we discuss the latest news about the H5N1 epidemic that's occurring here in the US and around the world. How are you doing today, Jon?
Hi, Jay. I'm doing all right. How are you?
Good, good. I had an interesting weekend. I joined. I'm not much of a protest person, but I actually joined the march this past Saturday. I mean, I think,
Good.
as as you and I both share, we have an incredible passion for public health, and I think what's really happening right now with the sort of tear down of all of the public health institutions we have in the United States is really a call to action for all of us. So I joined a couple of friends of mine and marched through Manhattan, which is really just a quite impressive spectacle of people who are just really upset at everything that's going on right now.
Yeah, there were people demonstrating all over the country, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, we saw pictures about it everywhere. I'm not sure it got quite the press attention, of course. There's obviously so much in the news about tariffs and so many other changes that are occurring. But for you and I, our world is really about science and about public health. And so, what I've been tracking most closely during this time when there's so much else going on is all the changes that are occurring. And as we get through this episode today, we're going to start off a little bit about the science and understanding of bird flu, but then we'll loop back into this topic, I think, because I do think it's going to be just incredibly important for us as public health people and scientists not to sit on the sidelines. It's important to get information about diseases, but it's also important to get information about what's happening to our policy and our institutions.
Yeah, Jay, I think it's great. And, something that's on my mind a lot, and a big reason why I really enjoy doing this with you is that I think that for the most part, people don't really understand how all the pieces fit together in our government to provide public health services. And they notice when those services disappear, when it affects them personally. But often, if they're noticing it at that point, the damage is so widespread. And so what's been really challenging about all of these changes happening in government is they're happening fast, they're happening vast. And I think that it's very hard to understand how it'll affect me personally. What does it mean for my life? This isn't about, can I still see my doctor? It's not about, if I'm sick, can I go to the doctor? It's about some general protections, whether it's monitoring for infectious diseases or providing services to people who are resource constrained. But these were really important services that our government provided for a very long time. And so helping people understand that and getting engaged, understanding the politics a little bit is really important now. And I'm glad to hear that you got involved this weekend.
Yeah, and I think you made a critical, several important points, but I think one of the critical ones that I take away and that kind of leads us into this topic for this week is the complexity of these systems that we have to anticipate what threats might be coming, detect them early when they do these like detailed investigations to understand so we can prepare for things that happen in the future. And that complexity is a problem when it comes to health communication. And as you point out, when people start to notice the problems, like when a plane crashes, that is the downstream impact of a lot of parts of a complex system failing. And the same is true when it comes to major epidemics, right? They're part of a whole series of events that occurred before there. And the earlier we can track those events, the better off we are. And so that kind of leads me into my first, topic I wanted to discuss with you today, which is there actually has been some good news about bird flu over the past few months. The number of confirmed outbreaks that are occurring in poultry, like chicken and in ducks, fell to 53 flocks last month after reaching 133 in January. So that's a pretty big drop off in terms of the number of outbreaks that have been reported. Outbreaks in cattle also fell to 21 herds last month after peaking at 253 herds in November. But, as we tend to do on the show, where we're kind of anticipating what threats are and we're talking about complex systems, I think what worries me and a lot of other people is what happens when birds start migrating north during the spring? And, this is part of a complex system where birds are flying all over the world and they're also potentially bringing bird flu with them. So why don't you teach us a little bit, Jon, about what we might expect as it relates to sort of bird migration patterns and bird flu?
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to talk about that because what's really important to remember is this virus doesn't come out of nowhere. All flu viruses, including the seasonal ones that we get every year in people, originate in migratory birds, typically waterfowl like ducks and geese. all different varieties of species. These are natural reservoirs for influenza viruses of all varieties. And there's a few types of flu that birds carry that have the ability to affect people. And H5N1 is one of them, although human infections are still fairly rare. When it does get into people, it can be bad news. And so we can't get complacent. And this goes back to the importance of having systems in place to track these things. It's great that infections on dairy herds and in poultry are starting to come down. We hope that we can get those under control. But there is still a wildlife reservoir that can deliver virus anew. And so migration becomes a really important factor. The birds that carry flu viruses travel hundreds and thousands of miles in their seasonal migration. And I want to show you something, Jay. This will be pretty interesting, I think, to show just how small a world it is when we look at flyways or migratory routes that birds take. The world is very connected. So you look at us here in the United States, and we are connected to South America through the north-south flyways. And there are really four major pathways that birds take: along the Atlantic, through the center of the country, along the West Coast. Different species follow different north-south patterns. We think about birds flying south for the winter. This is how they go, and they go pretty far. But also take a look up in Alaska. There are birds that move between the United States through Asia all the way down to Australia and the South Pacific. That is a massive amount of distance to cover. And we think about how most influenza viruses originate in Southeast Asia, in that area. Birds can pick up these new variants of viruses and then migrate and bring them into the United States via Canada through a north-south route. So when we talk about annual migrations and birds coming in, this is an opportunity for new variations of influenza to come in with the birds that normally travel through the United States.
Yeah, I think this is really just one of these topics that even I, when I was first starting to study public health, it took me a long time to grasp, like how complex our animal systems are, that birds are flying, that the birds that are coming into North America actually spent time over in Asia and in Australia during those winter months. And the fact that that is one of probably the primary ways we believe that, various strains of flu emerge, evolve, and then spread around the world.
Yeah, this is what I think is so interesting about looking at disease from an ecological perspective. We know that there are viruses naturally carried by animals that have the ability to jump into people. So understanding the behavior and the ecological patterns those animals have really help us understand what our risk is. So we want birds to migrate. Birds are a really important part of our ecosystem. We know that they use important waterways when they come through the United States. They breed, they hang out, but they also have an opportunity to interact with mammals. And we don't hear as much about this in the news, but in South America, there were massive outbreaks of bird flu in sea lions and seals along the coast. Huge die-offs, thousands and thousands of animals. And again, we suspect it's true. There was mammal-to-mammal transmission. It's most likely. It's the only way to explain these huge die-offs. So we also have to pay attention to what's happening in mammalian wildlife, because that is going to forecast a virus's potential to get into people and potentially cause an outbreak in us.
What would be your best guess about what might happen as we get to spring? Do you think it's likely that that there'll be a recurrence of outbreaks on farms and both poultry farms and cattle, or is it just too hard to tell?
Well, it's certainly possible. We just recently saw the first instance of a different genetic variation of H5N1 on a dairy farm in the United States. It was the first instance, a subtype called D1.1, and when it gets into people, it has caused human fatalities. It's different enough genetically from the other strain that's been circulating around. And so I think we do have to pay attention to what's coming in through these migratory pathways and probably expect other types of flu to come in. Now, does that mean we're going to see a whole new round of outbreaks on farms? It's unclear, because we also don't know what existing immunity might do in terms of dampening the effect of a new viral introduction. So we're really going to have to wait and see. Again, important to monitor these things.
Yeah, and I think this gets to the main issue that we're always trying to make people aware about, which is this isn't about, being fearful of what the future is, but it is about being prepared, right? Just like we have, police and fire and defense systems, we have, checkpoints at our borders. And regardless of what you feel about that sort of politics of it, I think we all generally agree we need these systems in place to keep us safe, because we can't predict what's going to happen. And I think this is where, it's so important for us to be thinking about what might happen, because those of us who've worked in public health, our job is to keep the public safe. And the way we keep the public safe is thinking about these worst case scenarios. And the only way we can think about them, and sort of I'll lead into our next point here, is when we actually have people in place to do that thinking. And not only do we have people in place, we actually have labs and other systems in place to do what needs to get done. And I think one of the disheartening things that happened last week, and one of the reasons that led me to join the march on Saturday, was there have been some major cuts in public health. And, I've talked separately on some of my other videos about CDC, but I want to mention FDA. Like, the Food and Drug Administration is one of our two major food safety agencies. The other is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And this past week, the chief medical officer of FDA was fired, as was the veterinary lead for the bird flu response. And, this really worries me, because one of the ways we need to be monitoring bird flu is to be monitoring what's entering our food supply, like our milks and our cheeses. And so, John, I just want to think about, what is your reaction to this news this week, that, all these complex systems we have in place to monitor what happens and whether these diseases enter us, some of the people and some of the labs and some of the systems in place are being torn apart.
Yeah, it puts us at greater risk. When you hear in the news about some kind of food recall, maybe it's spinach because they found E. coli in it, and thousands of supermarkets in our, supply chain have to send back that food that might potentially be contaminated. And that probably saves lots of lives, people not getting infected, not eating that contaminated food. When you lose the ability to test and detect things that could make us sick in our food supply, then we're rolling the dice. And I think that's the most important thing about losing a lot of the experts at the FDA, is that we're just losing the systems and the ability to notice issues with our food supply in time to protect people.
Yeah, I mean, some of the important work that, just a small snippet of the important work the FDA has done during this time on bird flu, is they've documented and helped to identify the fact that raw pet food is a risk. As you and I have talked about, more and more cats are being infected.
Yep.
And there's no reason to believe that other pets that we keep in our home couldn't be at the similar risk in the future. FDA played a critical role in identifying those and tracking some of the brand products that have been particularly problematic. The second is really showing and demonstrating that, at least at the present moment, pasteurizing our milk, that is, treating it the way we have pretty much since the origin of understanding germ theory, that keeps our milk safe. And yeah, I mean, I want these things in place because I want us to be safe and enjoy our lives. And I do worry that if we pull out some of these pieces of our systems, all of these complex patterns by which diseases emerge, we just have less of a window into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got to be more careful. And it really, speaks to the importance of paying attention when there is disease reporting. There is, some monitoring that still happens. The CDC is putting out some data as they get it. The Animal Plant and Health Inspection Agency, APHIS, does a lot of the screening on farms. So, fortunately, there are still very dedicated people doing their best to generate information to keep us safe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a good note for us to end on right now. We want, thank you for watching, because one of the most important things you can do if you're out there watching is get involved, right? Like, think about the ways in which you can advocate and push for public health. These are things we need in our lives to keep us healthy and wealthy. As a country, we need to be healthy to be able to do those things. And so the more you get involved out there, the better we'll all be. So thank you again for joining this episode of Thermometer, our weekly edition of Inside Bird Flu. And we'll look forward to updating you next week. Have a good week.
See you soon, Jay. Take care.